Glad you could join me. Today is part 2 of making a fireside set. I'm going to be showing the processes that I go through to make a poker, a shovel and a brush. I'll start working on the poker. I've got this chalk mark on the anvil which is at 500 millimeters, so that's how long from the back of the anvil to there. That's how long I'm going to be making the poker, and you'll see when I put the poker on at the moment, or the piece of steel, it's about maybe 2 inches from the line. So hopefully once I've forged out the end and drawn a bit of a taper down, it should be 500 millimeters long. To start off, I'm going to upset the end, and to upset the end I'm going to have to do it in the vise, because if I do this I'm going to be hammering on the top of our dragon's head, which I don't want to do, obviously, because I'm going to mash the head up if I do that. So I'm going to put it in the vise and then upset the end. And I'm going to do this because I'm then going to forge a diamond point on the end of the poker. And so this effectively involves creating an offset square on a square bar. But when you forge from round to square, you're going to lose volume. So if I didn't upset it, I would end up with a tiny little diamond point on the end of the poker. And I actually quite like a bit of a bigger point. So to do that, I need to put quite a hefty upset on the end, then re-square it in the opposite way to the square that is already on there, if that makes sense. So I'll put it in the vise horizontally, so we got the most surface area contact that we can get, and then use lots of little hits. I'll just go straight in that. I can straighten that by hooking it back to myself. I'll take a new heat, and I should only do one more upsetting heat because we've got quite a good upset there already. You'll also notice as I've been straightening the bar, I've now put a square onto the upset, so we can come on the diagonals to forge our offset square, creating the diamond point. Got a nice high heat. I'll turn up on the 45 and forge out a steep taper. Now, when doing this, you'll notice I've got some serious fish lips on the end of the bar. I'm going to leave that, and I'll show you a little trick that you can do with it. I'll keep the end clean, and I'll bring those folds over. So at the moment we've got lots of folds in the end of the bar. All that I'm going to do is bring it up to a forge welding heat and forge weld the end. You'll also notice that our flats have twisted, but because we've did a nice big upset, I can just forge these sides down and re-square it so that it now resembles a diamond point. I'll forge that down a little bit more, and it's sort of, this section wants to have quite a large taper on anyway, so we've got to forge a taper down to about here, round it up, then a taper down to here, and that one's going to be square, so we get a groovy section sort of in the middle where it's square round, you know, a square with a rounded edge, which then fades into a square and then fades into a diamond point. I'll start on the taper up at the twist and gradually draw it down. Now I'll work on this section, drawing down a nice square taper. Just check my length. You see, I'm about 5mm off my length, but we'll get that 5mm in finishing off all of these tapers, because we're still at a dirty finish in the square round section, so I need to neaten that up. This section also wants neatening up, and then the end as well. So we will, all of that finishing heat, we'll stretch it out, probably that extra 5mm to give us our length. I'll start on the square round, and literally you just rotate and clean up the corners. I'll now knock the corners off of the square taper. I'll just take a heat on the end to clean that up a little bit more. But the taper's all finished now. And it is quite a nice, I think, taper to go from round to square round and then to square and then the point on the end. I think it is pretty cool, really. This was a designer poker that I learned to make with Bill Carter. He would always do a ram on the end, or like, you know, a shepherd's crook or a ball or whatever, you know, a finial on the end. His twist was slightly different. He used to just flatten it and then twist it rather than doing four sides and cutting a line. But it was still quite a cool twist that created, and it was a much quicker one to make. Maybe I'll show that at some point. I don't know if I might have done it in another video. I can't remember now. I've made quite a few videos. I might have done it in the twisting video. I can't remember. But yeah, that's quite a cool twist. Just take a round bar, flatten it, and then twist it. It's a bit like twisting flat bar. And you can do the same thing where it fades into a round bar on both ends. And then, of course, the taper, round, square, or square, circle, square, and then a diamond point on the end. We've got our length there, you can see. It's almost perfect, is that? I measure from the top of the face rather than the top of the horns as well, because all the animal heads and things have different horns on it, and you're never really going to hold them there. You're going to hold them on the twist. So if you measure from the back of the face or the top of the head to the point, and that's pretty good. You just got to give it a straighten. But I know that this anvil has it's got a depression in the middle there, so if I go sideways I can just straighten a bar really easily and sight down it from the end. That will do for the poker. We can move on to forging the brush and the shovel. So I make quite a lot of these Fireside sets, and so to speed up the making of the shovel, I've made this template. So the template just sits over the top of this just sheet steel. It's about, I think it's 2mm thick, this sheet steel, so we can then trace around the outside of the template and then cut that out with the angle grinder. I just dotted that mark there, which we can now drill to 6.5mm, and that's going to be where we then attach the shovel to the fire iron with the dragon's head on. I've got to bend these sides up, and then I do weld this rather than forging it completely to shape. So it's like a net at the moment. So I'm going to bend these sides up, weld it along there, grind it so you can't really see any evidence of the weld, and then we can rivet it on to the actual other piece. as I've got a tenon to forge on that piece with the dragon's head and the twist on. Both the brush and the shovel need a tenon forging on the end. I've forged out this piece which is going to be for the shovel. So the shovel is going to get put on there and then we can just rivet it on. And it does just about work with only one rivet. Obviously the shovel will pivot if this is loose, but if you tighten it up you can get it on there so it doesn't spin. I'll show you how I forged this one out, and I need to forge one out for the brush. The brush then gets threaded on. So we've got to make sure that this is a perfect round, then cut some threads on and screw the brush onto the end. To forge out this tenon, I'm going to come on the near edge of the anvil and just try and be accurate with my hammer blows. So I can't use a monkey tool to clean the shoulder up at the anvil, so I've got to clamp it in the vise. If I do it at the anvil, I'll be upsetting on that nice dragon's head that I put on the end. So I've got to do it at the vise. There we are, we've got a nice square shoulder on the tenon. I can now forge a bit of a taper. Again, like the poker, a square circle taper down to the end. I'll just give it a quick straighten. I'll set this piece aside, then we can work on the shovel, get that ready, and then rivet the two together. I'll clamp this in the vise and bend it down. I can neaten up all of these folds on this anvil. These seams at the sides, I'll just weld so you don't actually see them, so it looks like it's all, flowing around the corners. So I'll weld them shut and then grind them back. I've welded the shovel up and ground the welds back, so we're ready to rivet. I'm going to put the tenon piece in the vise, and I've cut the tenon to length, slide this over the top. I've then got this, which is actually a big punch, so I can use this and set the rivet with a hammer, because if I'm trying to do it with a hammer, it is quite hard when that's there to actually get the rivet. So I'll do it just with a top tool. Try to get it as square as I can to the actual animal head and the square on the piece. There's a bit of raking on the front, but we can clean that up with either a grinder or just a careful hammer blow. You're always really going to get that when you're putting something in the vise. You can put a spacer block on the other end so that to prevent the raking, but I mean it's easy enough to clean up really, as long as it's not too deep. Sometimes a couple of hammer blows can loosen the shovel, so you best just check. That's fine. You see there, even though there is only one rivet, one tenon, it's not pivoting anyway. I'm trying to pivot it in my hand. and it's not going anywhere. So that's good enough for me, a good enough construction, and it is quite nice. You can, of course, weld a shovel on, but I think that's a little bit too cheating. We have sort of cheated with this, as these corners aren't forged, they are welded, but I always think that a little rivet or a tenon does look much better. You know, a tenon there, you have that little button of the rivet to show that it is traditionally forged. At least this bit is, not the corners. On all of these tools, I'm going to do a hot oil finish, so I'll show you what I mean by that with the shovel. So I've got an oily rag, and I can just smear some oil all over the piece. You can see it is quite hot. You want it to steam or smoke when you apply the oil. It's sort of like you're burning the oil on to the steel. Gives it a nice dark look, but it does also finish it, so it's not going to rust as quickly. I'll flip it around, put the head in the fire, heat that up, and then finish that as well. I just dunked the head in some oil to make sure that I get in all of the cracks and crevices of the facial features, rather than just doing it with a rag, as you tend to get areas where you don't actually apply the oil. So by dunking it in some oil and then rubbing away the excess, we get the same nice finish, but all over the face. To actually attach the brush to the piece of steel, which I've already made up, I'm going to cut a thread on this tenon and then screw the brush on. I've got the tenon as round as I can get it. Obviously, it's not a perfect cylinder, but hopefully it's going to be good enough for me to now cut some threads on the end. There we go, got a thread cut all the way along. I've already finished this as well, so I don't need to get it hot anymore. It's already got the oil finish on, so this piece is now completely done. I'm just getting the label off the brush. It's got like a 5mm hole in, and this is a 6mm thread, so you can just screw the brush on. There you go. You can open the brush out and then put a nut on the piece of steel, the tenon. You can screw a nut on to make sure that the brush is extra secured, but you know, it's not going to go anywhere if it's used as a brush. It's not going to fall off. It leaves a nice clean fit up as well between the brush and the actual tool. So there we are, the finished brush, shovel and poker. They are very similar in their sort of design. Obviously, they're supposed to be a set, so they are supposed to look the same, and then the bottom just changes. The brush is an interesting one, how I just thread the end of a tenon and then screw it in. As I said, you can then open the brush out and put a nut on the inside to really tighten it up. It is a bit fiddly to do, but it does mean that the brush then is really securely on there. However, I find that in its lifetime as a brush, it's not going to get abused that much that the brush is then going to be stripped. You know, the wood is then going to be stripped and the brush fall off. It's never really going to get to that stage. But if you want to be extra secure, you can, of course, just screw a nut up on the inside. The shovel is perhaps not the most traditional way of making a shovel, as there is a weld in there. I think what I want to do in the future is make like a swage, where you can then just put a piece of sheet steel in, hammer down on the swage, and you end up with that nice cupped shovel shape. I think that would definitely be something that I want to do in the future, but I think trying to do it by hand, you would have to do it with sledgehammers, and also to actually make the swage itself by hand would be a little bit tricky. So it may have to be something that I do in the future once I have a power hammer, so that I actually have enough force to physically move, because you'll have to make that swage out of a block of steel. So to move that steel out the way to then create that suede shape for the shovel. Anyway, hopefully you've enjoyed this video. There are going to be a couple more. I've got a set of tongs to make with a little dragon's head on to match this set, and then the stand for all of these pieces to go on after that. Hopefully you'll stick around and watch those videos. If you do, I'll see you on one of those.